Welcome to Moonbeaming, a podcast about magic, creativity, the tarot, lunar living, and more. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, and I'm so happy you're here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Moonbeaming. I'm your host, Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, and if you are new here, this is a show about magic, creativity, life, tarot, lunar living, a lot more. I'm just really glad you're here. I'm glad you're here for this episode because I am doing a special tarot card deep dive episode. I love doing these. Friends, you know I can talk about tarot all day long, so we're going to be diving in deep. I hope that all of you are doing okay. What is new with me is I am finally beginning to be able to see some results from some systems I've been trying to implement all year. I know I don't talk too much about myself. I'm a pretty private person, in case you haven't noticed. But I just want to share because, man, what I will say is that this year has been very trying for me. It has been a 2 steps forward, then 2 steps back with a lot of things I've been trying to implement in my life. And yeah, I'm finally beginning to feel like I'm in some rhythm and some flow with what I've been trying to do. I was going to say since March, but honestly, it's been since 2020. I think a lot of us, I want to be really clear and say that the pandemic has affected so many of us. And I think a lot of us were very much going to do the whole new year, new me 2020 vision in 2020. And then things changed, So I want to be really transparent about that, I guess. I definitely had different ideas in mind. And also, to be very transparent, this year I've had a lot of health stuff on top of my regular health stuff. So no one ever plans for health stuff. So that took up quite a bit of my time and my energy. And yeah, things took a lot longer for me than I thought they would. And also longer than they have in the past, to be honest, personally, this year. So again, if this is you too, you're not alone. We're humans humaning here together. And also looking back, this whole process has taught me about patience and self-love and acceptance and devotion and staying the course even through a lot of false starts. And these are all really beautiful byproducts of what this year has taught me in my own process and my own practice. Y'all know that the studio is in full swing shipping the Many Moons Field Guide to Spirituality. This is the must-have guide for 2022. If you are ready to make some magic, if you are ready to take some risks, if you are ready to focus on yourself and healing and your practice, I am overjoyed. I am so thrilled at all of the support and all of the contributions. And I know you are too, because folks are letting us know. So it's really exciting. Also, probably there is going to be 1 or 2 more workshops I'll be offering this year. And so if you want to know more about that, hop on the newsletter. They'll be the first to know about those. Okay, those are my housekeeping. Those are my vulnerable shares. These are my notes for this time. Here we go. I am very excited, as I have said, to get into our tarot card for today, which is the 5 of Swords. As all of y'all know, I am doing my very best to create episodes for all of the Minor Arcana 5 tarot cards because we are in a 5-year, and this is an optimal time to rearrange structures, to look at some core wounds, to consciously create different beliefs, different practices for ourselves and for where we are now and also where we are going. And each one of the minor arcana fives has a part in being able to help us do these things. Believe it or not, believe it or not. I know it's hard when we think of the fives. We're like, ugh, groan, side eye roll. But hopefully, we're going to get into this more in this episode. I especially thought it was important to drop this episode just a few days, just a wee bit ahead of this upcoming eclipse that I think happens tomorrow. And I know it happens tomorrow. And eclipse season, which all of you know is the time to rewrite stories, to make amends with the past, begin new patterns, and in doing so, end old patterns. All of that fun stuff is all up for grabs now. Just kidding. It's usually not fun. It's usually really uncomfortable, but it's so necessary and so beautiful once we have done some of this stuff. Yeah. And what better tarot card to dive into around writing and creating new stories than the Five of Swords? Just a little note that if stuff is coming up for you that aren't Five of Swordsies, I did do an episode on the Five of Pentacles. If you're feeling like there's some wounds to be healed around worth, behaviors, value, physical health, the material world, money, vocation, give that episode a listen. It is episode 38. We'll link it in the show notes. And also, if you are trying to work on trusting yourself more, if you are interested in healing trauma, widening your perspective, this is the episode for you. If you want a super thorough rundown of the Five of Swords, more than those 1 or 2 paragraphs we often get in those little books that come with our decks, or when we Google things on the internet, or even tarot books themselves, then you're going to want to stay tuned. When I sat down to gather my notes and my thoughts for this episode, I felt a bit of pressure. The thing is, gentle listener, I want this podcast to be worth your time. I want what I do and share to be worth your listen and your attention. My goal is to be of service and to help you think about these archetypes in new ways and in ways that can help you, either in your own personal practice of daily polls or intuition, seeking within the tarot, or your magical practice, however that intersects with the tarot, or maybe even in your professional one as a tarot reader. And a lot of the time, it's really easy for me to share. You know, as y'all know, I have no shortage of things to say over my 17 plus years of deep study with the tarot, in practice with the tarot, has resulted in me usually just having to cut myself off because, as you all know, I could talk about these archetypes, just one of them, for 4 to 5 hours. Do not worry. Do not worry. This episode is not going to be 4 to 5 hours. I'm trying to get her in under an hour. So no worries there. Okay. But once in a while, like in this case, I kind of don't really know where to begin. And so I started tightening with these thoughts that are vague and existential, so vague and existential that we can like easily believe them, right? Like, what if I don't do a good job? What if I can't be helpful? What if I leave something out? And then later I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I left that out. What if in the relatively exhausted state I have been in for a while, which is real. I've been I've been fairly tired for the last, I don't know, month, 2 months or so. Like, what if I can't be as coherent as I want to be? What if I can't honor this sacred card? Because I find all the cards so sacred and so helpful and so necessary. All of that, it's a little much. This is a little extreme. It's an extreme place to take a podcast episode about a tarot card, right? And also, this is meta because when someone is thinking about the Five of Swords, of course, this energy would bubble up. Why not? This is an archetype about certain flawed thought patterns, the stories we make up to stop us from moving forward, the stories we feel comfortable telling ourselves so that we stay stuck or overly exhausted by extra work or hyper vigilant because our trauma brain is speaking to us much louder than other brains. This card is fundamentally, about how we communicate with ourselves and others and how we enact harm with our words, with our thoughts. And also, of course, within the card is how to heal that and how to change that, how our trauma or a past we didn't have a say over, a past perhaps that harmed us, quite often can continue into the future if we're not careful, if we are not conscious. The Five of Swords highlights how the abuse we have suffered at the hands of others can become internalized so that we, over time, become the one inflicting our own pain on ourselves, turning the swords inwards, the stories that we have been told about ourselves explicitly or implicitly can then become the baseline of our beliefs, which become our behaviors. We've got ourselves then a bit of a spiky nervous system, one that jumps to extremes, gets exhausted, then has to recover, and then this cycle becomes normal. So no wonder, right? I'm just sitting down to try to wrap my arms around this spiky card, and I got a little like poked myself. Not in a good way, poked in not a good way, right? It just makes sense. Everything I just ran down here are also some of the common themes in the fives in general, because we know that they often point to an acute moment of pain or suffering that illustrates a larger theme, pattern, or system we've created or that we've found ourselves to be stuck in. Most often, this is an unconscious pattern that started from childhood or that is ancestral, something your ancestors had to do or thought they had to do to survive within a harsh system, an unfair system, which is also what the fives are about. They're about where the system intersects with our daily life. So they point to larger systems we are operating within, like the gender binary or caste systems or capitalism. And so then, of course, they bring up the concessions we've had to make, the ways we've had to contort ourselves in order to survive or be loved or belong, the distortions or delusions we've taken on because they felt real. They bring up the coping mechanisms of all of this that weave themselves into our lives. And they also illustrate a moment where all of this that we've been internalizing and carrying, become too painful to continue on in the same way. It's this opportunity to see what is really you and what have you created in order to survive? Or what have you unconsciously ingested from society, your family? I don't know, like the collective, where you grew up, your workplace, and then end up internalizing and then sort of playing out in your behavior. Like little girls should be seen and not heard. Is that even a saying? I can't, like, what is wrong with us? I think that was a saying. It's just the one that popped into my head. Or like, here's another saying that might be a little more relevant, that I've been seeing floating around. That's like, busy isn't a personality, right? We've all seen that. So the fives point to this great moment where we can look at what we've been perpetuating that isn't ours, how we can name them, begin getting conscious of them, and then we can also shed them. We can also decide that we are going to try something different, work towards different systems. The fives really illuminate the beliefs we have that are not our own or that are not helping us. These beliefs become thoughts, which become behaviors, which become habits, which become patterns. And these, of course, are sometimes reactions and defenses, which we all operate out of, by the way. Me, you, us, we've all got them. And it is in the act of becoming conscious of them that they no longer control us in the same ways they have been. And that creates change. And that consciousness is really what the Five of Swords points to. When the Five of Swords comes up, we're thinking about the mind, communication, beliefs, stories, unconscious, subconscious, cutting cords, and a bunch of other things we're going to get into. Within the fives, there's this illustration of both the space that has been taken hostage, so to speak, non-consensually by this pattern or this thought. And within the fives is also the space where we can change that behavior, pattern, or thought. Because what do we need in order to change something? We need to confront it. And the fives often pop up when we are in the middle of an external situation that is illuminating a specific theme of scarcity or a core wound in our life that is ready to be confronted so that we might change it. And so because of this, like, these cards feel really intense. Sometimes they feel even more intense than a Nine of Swords or a Ten of Wands, because in the fives, we're in the messy middle. It's not over. We know where we don't want to be, but we don't quite know how it's going to end. And how much more easy is it to decide to quit things and move on in like a 10, than it is to take accountability, be in an awkward, uncomfortable space, let go of what we're not responsible for, and commit to being in process with something different or collaborating with others. It's very much a moment of being in process and not knowing sometimes if things are truly over, which often in a 9 or a 10, something has come to culmination. That 9 or that 10, it's the dark moon, it's the waning moon. Like, we're like, yeah, we got to go, girl. We're moving on. And in the fives, we're like, well, some of this stuff I think is working and some of it isn't. And I feel really uncomfortable and I feel really raw and I feel really vulnerable. OMG. And so it's because of all of this that also the fives are incredibly magical. We have to remember that the 5 is witchcraft. It's the 4 elements plus source, the pentacle, right? So in the fives, we see what elements are missing or maybe we don't have enough of. We look to see where we're resourced with certain elements, and we figure out how to alchemize them, how to transform them. What's more magical than healing trauma? What's more magical than self initiated transformation? What's more healing than not letting ourselves be defined only by our worst days or our worst moments? And so the fives can be this incredible opportunity to choose and create new systems that work for us, for who we are, for where we are going. It's exciting. The other day, my partner and I were having a conversation about our relationship and where we want it to go. And we talked about how lucky we feel to be with one another because in our families, and I'm not only speaking about his family or my family, but all families or most families, again, we don't love the broad strokes here, but a lot of families. Growing up, we didn't have a choice. We didn't have a choice of how we experience love or if we were going to get what we needed or how schedules were set up or how dynamics were set up. These things were chosen for us. And some were great and some were not great. And we navigated around them. We navigated with them. We resisted them in some places. And in some places, we became them. It's incredibly important to have relationships with others, whether that's good friendships or intimate romantic partners, where we're choosing them consciously, when we're creating them together, when we understand what the other person needs and we take those needs into consideration and they take our needs into consideration. That's what trust is. And that trust requires clarity and clear communication, which is what the Five of Swords is asking us to do. It's illustrating situations where there is some kind of betrayal, maybe where there's been a really not okay power over, a theft, some kind of battle that appears to not have been played fairly. You all know that I use tarot for divination purposes. That is one of the traditional and original uses of the tarot, of course. And so when I'm using tarot for divination for either myself or for clients, there are usually a lot of clear messages around this card. The thing is, folks can try to say things like, there are no bad cards, or try to sweeten the fives or the tower or the Three of Swords, or say that tarot isn't meant to be predictive. Sure. But my friends, we know that life is not easy. We know that hard things happen. And we know that tarot reflects that. Part of why I love tarot is that it reflects all of life, the good, the bad, the ugly, the amazing, the victories, the growth, the healing, the beauty, all of it. And all of us, no matter how enlightened we may be, or how, in quotes, like good we are, we're going to have these harder moments. And so this card often comes up when people are going through divorces or really bad breakups, or when there is something going on behind the scenes that they don't really know about. It's involving other people, obviously. This pops up in legal battles, particularly legal battles with people we were at one point close with. Maybe we had businesses with them. Maybe we were partnered with them, or like even with wills with family members. I see this a lot. These kinds of scenarios come up often with the Five of Swords. And so this is where that betrayal piece is really strong. When there's been some kind of triangulation, some kind of setup, some kind of extraction that we find ourselves having to deal with. For these reasons, entanglements with abusers or narcissists are implied when this card comes up sometimes. This is often a warning that whatever situation you're in, or inquiring about isn't going to end well. Even if you win, like I'm putting this in quotes, I'm talking about winning later on in this episode. Even if you get what you want, let's just say, it's not going to go down how you want it to. It's a affirmation, if you're wondering, if you pull this card and you're wondering, that your intuition about something feeling off is most likely correct. The Five of Swords often highlights this bigger idea that there isn't any winning, especially not in an unfair battle. But really, in general, winning isn't a thing. Humans love to create situations where there are winners and losers, certainly. I remember the Octavia Butler belief that humans' downfall is sort of too harsh of a word. Humans' challenge is that they're both incredibly, naturally, very, very intelligent and have an intelligence that is rare on this planet. And for whatever reason, want to create hierarchies, which is so Five of Swords meets Hierophant, which is why I'm bringing it up. In the larger scheme of life, we are just playing our own game. It's not even a game. I don't even like associating life with games, but you know what I'm saying. And not everyone knows this. A lot of people are trapped in a collective game, they think, They are indoctrinated into competition or power over. And that's a trauma response, as far as I'm concerned. How many times have you been in a situation with someone and you know that this not okay situation, it's not about you, that whatever's going on is some sort of extreme pattern that this person has, and they will create any scenario, any story to make you the villain, to be able to justify their behavior, to be able to justify their win, right? Five of Swords is very anti-vaxxer on the internet, screaming about their sovereignty or whatever else they come up with to create some story that allows them to believe whatever it is they believe. We see instances of the Five of Swords everywhere. Gaslighting, word salad, I'm sorry you feel that way. These are all in some way a Five of Swords energy. So what do we do when we find ourselves in situations like this? Well, first we have to get clarity. We have to really name what is going on. What is going on for us? How are we going to respond? We have to get clear around what's going on in the nervous system, the stories you're telling yourself, perhaps the stories you're telling yourself about yourself that aren't really true. We have to think about what's actually activating us. What in this situation is related to some kind of wound that's being uncovered? Is this related to some childhood situation or a past situation that really activates a particular belief that is about yourself or the world that's painful? What can you tell yourself, your inner child, your activated part? What can you tell them that will change things? How can you make space for yourself and your emotions in a way that's going to acknowledge yourself that might be different than how this got activated or how there was a certain pattern of abandonment or neglect that began the wound? Or if it's none of that, but you find yourself in some kind of battle, be really clear about what parts of the battle are important to you and what you are going to do about it. Or do you just need to drop the rope? Babes, sometimes we just got to walk away. Sometimes that money or that project or that business or that last word is not important if it keeps us connected to someone who is determined to hurt us. If it keeps us engaged in distractions that take us away from our peace of mind. And if there is a larger pattern being highlighted, how can you try to end the pattern? This could be about looking back to see what your intuition told you about the situation from the beginning and naming those red flags. The red flags might have always been there. And a message of the Five of Swords is that maybe it was your scarcity stuff, your lack of trust in yourself that led you to ignore some clear messages. Maybe that stopped you from creating a contract that clearly outlined job roles, or from asking for the money up front, or maybe we really had such a strong need to belong, to be loved, to be seen, that we ignored some warning signals that the person maybe wasn't seeing us. When we tune into what we need from the beginning, what our needs are, when we zero in on what we need to feel in order to trust ourselves or other people, that helps us change patterns as well. My dears, our shadows are such vast treasure troves of information. And a lot of times, in Five of Swords fashion, we get snagged on that surface pain. We think, oh, I was such, how did I not see that? I was so naive. How could I do that to myself? And if we drop in and if we go a little bit deeper, we can allow some of our shadow parts of our wounds to give us information. Well, you really needed love, or you're really feeling like you need to be seen and acknowledged. And that's really, really important information. Just like jealousy is really, really important information. It's saying what we wish we had, what we think we need in order to feel whole. And that's, of course, why these harder cards are so integral to our healing. The Five of Swords also can come up when we're having projections. If we do have a history of trauma, we can look for monsters where there are none. We can be overly protective of ourselves or be guarded to the point of unnecessary defense. If you have a history of trauma, you have PTSD or CPTSD, it's so necessary to be able to have the tools to regulate the nervous system, to be able to discern when you are in a reaction, a spiral, or if it is truly your intuition. What can we do when we're starting to get hooked, when we feel helpless? We cannot solve the problems we have in the energy that they were created in. What that means is we have to tend to the wound, but not become the wound. The Five of Swords says, yes, we are all wounded. Will you let that wound become the source of your thoughts, beliefs, and actions? When that happens, you become defined mostly as your pain and suffering. Or can you let that wound offer up lessons, messages, so as to integrate it? And then you can move forward in the spirit of compassion. And this is not about spiritually bypassing, of course. We have to name the emotions that are coming up, give them space, and understand what we need to give those emotions, what messages those emotions have for us. And then we can create different energy or see things through a different perspective. And this is what the Pamela Coleman Smith card illustrates. It's in these moments that highlight what a genius she was. She is. You look at the card And what most people see is the winner in the foreground. They're clutching their swords, they're gloating a bit, they look pleased as punch. Pretty evil. They look a little bit like Sting in the original David Lynch's Dune. Have y'all seen that? Highly recommend before seeing the remake of Dune. Anyway, in the background, we see two people walking away. Their backs are to us. They appear to be walking towards water. One is holding their face in their hands. They seem to clearly be the losers. They're the ones who've lost their swords in the battle. In the background are angry, gray, jagged looking clouds, like a storm is ending or beginning. This is not a calm scene. We know the battle, the standoff, was violent. A weird part of this scene, of course, is that there are only 3 figures and 5 swords. Theoretically, everyone could have had a sword, and Mr. Redhead Victor person could still have more swords left over. So we have this further illustration that this is a vindictive fight. It's not fair. The winner won by foul play, perhaps by singling out some vulnerabilities of the others in a way that went far beyond the container of the fight. Often in cards like these, we can ask ourselves or our client, what figure do you identify with? Even with the major arcana that will show like one figure, you can ask, do we identify with that figure? Like, do you feel a kinship with the emperor when you look at it or not? Why not? Or what aspect of the empress do you feel most resonant with? The resentment of overgiving or the deep sigh of relief that comes when you create things on your own timeline out of your own pure inclinations. And of course, what I've gotten mostly from clients is that they do not associate with that foreground figure, the one who has all the swords. And that's interesting to me because if one of the things the swords are about power, and this archetype can be about disarming power or gathering power, wouldn't the foreground figure maybe be a successful coup over those that are trying to harm them? Like someone becoming victorious by their strategy, by their nimbleness or their strength? Most people do not want to be the person holding all the swords. And I think that shows how many people have been in situations where they've been defeated, where they've been led to not only believe that them losing, so to speak, makes them somehow bad or less than, but also gives the person who stole from them or cheated on them or lied to them or betrayed them a greater power than they had previously. Power over. Why do we do that? Why do we let people who can't even clearly see us, who clearly cannot care about us, why do we give them more power than we give ourselves? There's this conflation with power and control, that associating the loss of pride or our authority or our so-called goodness, there's so much shame there, as well as potentially distorting or changing the definitions of our very identity. Sometimes pain will end up rewriting our own beliefs about ourselves, which then determine these actions that we're going to take and how we even treat ourselves. This is what trauma can do to us. This is all it can take away. And so for this reason, the 5 of Swords can be a card about taking our power back, refusing to let abusers or narcissists or sociopaths hold that much weight, hold that much power in our lives. Because, like I said, 5 of Swords can be about how much power we're giving a certain situation or thought. It's also about the lens through which we are seeing the situation through, our perspective. Because we know that swords are about the mind and clarity and how we see. And sometimes this card suggests that we're seeing the world or the situation through a lens of pain, of hypervigilance, of haves and have nots. And when we take this to the extreme, we create horizontal oppression. We create jealousy. We create very punishing perfectionism. Nothing can ever be good enough. Or maybe the only things that can be enough are the more superficial things, the external wins, or high drama, or the extremes, those which really grab a hold of our nervous system, the love bombing, the wild promises, not the reality of being in an intimate, healthy, peaceful relationship. And that, of course, extends to ourselves, to the relationship we have to ourselves. Maybe we've gotten used to situations that activate our nervous system, that place us in high stress scenarios so that we can receive lots of cortisol, tons of dopamine, which, as we also know, the swords directly relate to the brain, the nervous system, the chemicals that we can't get enough of or become addicted to that become patterns. I'm saying this also with no shame and no judgment. Like, I have ADHD. I've had to look a lot at my patterns of being addicted to cortisol or normalizing certain patterns that are directly tied to my brain. So there's no shame with any of this. Like I said, when we become conscious of these things, that's when we can change our relationship to them and we can move into a more supportive and compassionate relationship. When this card comes up, we have to figure out how to make our own peace. Oftentimes, when this card comes up, we have to create our own closure, make our own peace, and remove ourselves from harmful situations. We have to forgive ourselves. The lessons we learn from these hard situations, these scenarios, need to be implemented so we don't do this again. Discernment is such a huge theme of the card, and discernment is only going to continue to be a theme next year. It's one of the themes this year. It's going to be the theme next year. Discernment can happen most easily when our nervous system is regulating, when we aren't acting out of urgency, when we've made friends with our intuition, and when we know what is most important to us. The Five of Swords process wants us to define what's true for us, not based on what other people are telling us. You will always be the villain in the story of someone who has decided to misunderstand you. The illustration itself in the traditional Rider-Waite-Coleman-Smith rendition of the Five of Swords shows us that there are many truths. Like I said, like, who knows how the battle went down? Maybe we're just seeing one perspective. Maybe it's time to stop letting the truths of others dictate your time, your behavior. Maybe it's time to let go of the distractions, the energy sucks, or even take some space from those relationships where the person isn't actually seeing you, or you don't feel like you can trust them. Or even worse, they're defining who you are and your experiences. Maybe it's time to drop some ropes, to cut some cords, and take your power back. There are so many ways the Five of Swords can manifest. Stress, feeling between a rock and a hard place, indecision, self-sabotage. That's a big one, I think, in this card, self-sabotage. future tripping, shame spiraling, being cut off from one's intuition, worrying, having anxiety, egoic ambition, conflict, and conflict avoidance, and healing that. I think of that Sarah Schulman book, Conflict is Not Abuse. Learning how to live with and be okay with conflict, learning how to deal with harm, learning how to make mistakes and mess up and still be kind to ourselves. These are some huge themes right now that the Five of Swords can help us with. Cancel culture totally ties into this card. Even the ways in which we're now seeing very privileged or powerful folks with influence, with like huge careers, are crying out that they've been canceled, basically painting themselves as victims for being TERFs or being called to account or for spreading hate speech or even worse, and then having to actually deal with the consequences, but trying to make themselves out into being the victim. That is so Five of Swords, right? The other thing I just wanted to kind of point out with like some of these definitions, some of these themes that I rattled out, sometimes when you pull this card and it's your morning pull and you're asking about the day or you want to see what's going to happen, it's the best because it's saying, okay, this might be a day where there's some tension. I want to be really clear and like not every card that is extreme or painful is super doom and gloom, everything falling apart, don't trust anyone, and so on and so forth. It could just be like, you're going to have a day where you are going to have a lot of things that you're going to have to make decisions around. And you're probably going to end the day with decision fatigue. So maybe you just have to be okay with that. Maybe you make one or two decisions when you're feeling okay and then save the rest for tomorrow. Or maybe you reach out for help. Maybe the indecision fatigue is highlighting how you can kind of shut down and you're like, I can just power through, I can just do this. When maybe you need to text a friend and ask them their opinion. There are so many different ways, really subtly and really beautifully, that these cards can pop up in our life. So I also want to be really clear and say that if you get the Five of Swords as your card of the day, and you're like, oh my gosh, all I'm doing today is staying at home with a book. Like it's Sunday, I'm just chilling out. What's going to happen? Maybe I shouldn't text my friend, or maybe I shouldn't leave the house. Like, no, of course not. It could just be a little nudge around shifting your perspective around something that comes up for you. It could just be you're watching your mind wander and go into some areas that are maybe an area that's not going to help you out. And you can sort of tug your mind back and say, okay, well, we're not going to think about this right now. I'm going to read a book or sing a song or walk around the block or stretch my body or do some belly breathing because, hey, brain, like, let's not go there today. I'm having a nice Sunday. I can just chill. So I just want to be clear about that with these cards. All of the cards are 360-degree experience, and some of it can be very subtle and very just in the moment, and some of it can be larger. Just wanted to say that. I wanted to end on some of the healing opportunities that are found within this card. This card can be about ending silent contracts. Silent contracts are unspoken agreements that we make in many of the relationships we're in. Maybe in our family of origin, we're the peacemaker, the moderator. And in taking on that role, that means we can't ever have problems. We have to always be the responsible one. Perhaps in our intimate friendships, we take on the role of the one who's always available, the consummate helper, so that we don't feel like we can be needy or turn people away who are looking for our help. And so over time, our identity becomes that. And our truth becomes that we've got to be liked at all costs, no matter what. And if we sit with ourselves long enough or go to therapy about it, maybe we find that we step into the role of the helper because we're afraid of emotional intimacy. We feel like maybe we're not worth anything unless we are giving someone something, that we can't have needs. And this is where some really beautiful, deep healing can take place. Ending a silent contract looks like no longer accepting certain dynamics, doing something differently, even if it feels hard in the moment, creating particular boundaries, or advocating for oneself, or having a conversation. It doesn't have to be this huge thing. You could just say with a friend where you find yourself being the giver, you could say, "Hey, do you have time tomorrow to process with me about something? I'm having an issue at work and I'm feeling kind of ungrounded, and I'd love your take on this," right? And that begins to create a different kind of relationship. The Five of Swords can come up as encouragement to begin shifting perfectionism if we have it, people pleasing tendencies if we've got them, right? If we let other people steamroll us, or if we're only responding to other people, this can be just a little nudge, a little tap saying, what's going on here? How about we try shifting our perfectionism? Maybe we choose the new identities we'd like to have. Maybe we're going to begin writing a new story about ourselves. And this starts here, right now. And in this way, the Five of Swords can be about us defining ourselves for ourselves. I think of that Audre Lorde quote, "If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive." In the Five of Swords, we can shed the limits of who we told ourselves we are. When we tell ourselves these different stories, different pathways emerge in our actual brains. We know this, and also in our lives. And when we remember that we are not our thoughts, that we don't have to believe every thought, nor do we have to believe what other people tell us about ourselves. This is a game changer. We can be curious with ourselves. Why do I think this? Why am I choosing this thought? Part of the freedom that this archetype offers us is in affording us the ability to not get hooked into other people's stories, and also not getting hooked on our own. If you find yourself this year, as so many of us have found ourselves, ready to move on from certain illusions we've held as truth, ready to explore who we really are, not just what others have told ourselves we are, and communicate that to ourselves, to our loved ones, and by our behaviors, our habits, our overall patterns, the Five of Swords helps us to do this. Because, my babes, let's remember the card that comes after. It's the Six of Swords, a card of movement, taking risks, of protection, of seeking help, of rebalance. The sixes are always a turning of the page, a pocket of resolution or integration that comes after conflict or a period of scattered energy or a messy middle. Sometimes we get put in the same kinds of situations because we have to figure out precisely what our role is in them. Maybe we have to see the situation from a different perspective. Maybe it's ancestral, maybe it's societal or somatic, and so on and so forth. We can address the core wounds from different perspectives so that we heal that and the pattern that we no longer want to continue can stop. Each time we have a conflict that feels important, we can choose to address it differently by reframing, collaborating with our nervous system, with stepping outside of any narrow, constrictive beliefs about the situation, about who we are, or about any limits or expectations we've been putting on the outcome. We can examine the systems we've put in place that create certain scenarios. Those scenarios that keep repeating themselves, those ones, the ones that are like over and over, like clockwork. We're like, wait, why am I here again? Why is this happening again? Or we find ourselves saying, this always happens, right? Raise his hand, not just me. And if we take a step back, if we get this different perspective, we can see again where our beliefs or our wounds are creating our behavior and how that then becomes habits and how those habits create patterns. And then here we are again, reinforcing an old subconscious belief that once upon a lily pad helped us stay safe. Maybe it underscored our identity as the responsible one in the family or the one that needs chaos in order to feel normal, or the one that can only do things at the last minute so they get a wild dopamine spike and can keep their identity as having a failure to launch, and almost but not quite. And so the Five of Swords can highlight a snap out of it moment where we can use creativity, consciousness, and curiosity to stop that pattern, to try something different, to begin building from other foundations and other belief systems. We know that when we change ourselves, we can change larger systems. The system wants us to compete. It says there can only be one star, one winner, one person who is deserving of love or attention. Success can only happen in these ways. Gentle listener, there is nothing, I repeat, nothing that will drain your energy, your life force, your purpose, more than buying into the lies of the system, more than comparing yourself to others, trying to be like others. This takes you away from your authentic self and what you came here to do. Being a true intuitive means staying in your lane, trusting yourself, healing your nervous system. We don't want to replicate harmful systems that don't serve all of us. We want to create our own healthier systems. And like going back to this idea of that battle we were talking about with the Five of Swords, talking about at what cost. Ask yourself, if I stay small, if I let myself or my success be defined by others, if I let myself be defined by negative self-talk or limits on my capabilities, what am I denying the universe? What am I denying the world, my community, my friends, my soul, my future me, when I sell myself short, when I don't believe in myself, when I come up with 1,000,001 excuses for why I can't start, or tell myself concrete stories about how the future is going to work out based on a past I didn't even choose. The costs of not believing in yourself or not trusting in your own intuition aren't only costing you, they're also costing the world your brilliance. What do we gain when we let ourselves choose who we are, especially in a world who would rather have us be flattened or in pain or fighting with ourselves instead of fighting for justice, instead of joining together? This is another message from the Five of Swords. consciously choose to shift your perspective, tell yourself your truth, and dream your dreams. You do not have to know how the story is going to end to begin writing it. Okay. Hopefully, this gave folks things to think about with this card. I really hope it took this card out of this flattened binary, like bad or good or this or that. The tarot is about so much more. I encourage you, if you feel called, to see what shadows, what material from the past that this eclipse is highlighting for you. Often eclipses are pretty loud. We don't usually have to force much. We normally don't have to do a lot of digging around eclipse season. What we're meant to deal with is pretty clear. So see if you can zoom out, Five of Swords style, get a wider perspective, a different perspective, check in with where you're ready to heal, place your awareness there, and enjoy what shifts as a result. Until next time, we have some really great episodes coming up, so stay tuned. If you have not subscribed to this podcast, please subscribe. If you have not rated and reviewed this podcast and you've been listening, I know you have, please rate and review. It helps people find us. And if you'd like to further support my work by joining my Patreon, click the link in our show notes for a good tarot time. Okay, I'm sending everyone clarity and illumination during this time. Bye. Moonbeaming is brought to you by the Moon Studio. We are created and hosted by Sarah Faith Gottesdiener. Editing is by Caitlin George Parker, and the sound is by Will Owen. Thank you for your support. Witches in the autumn leaves, collecting things for John.